Imagine, for a second, surviving a horrific shipwreck, like right in the dead of night. You somehow crawl your way onto a tiny, completely waterless coral reef.
Yeah, you're battered, you're freezing.
Exactly. You're freezing, but you're alive. And that relief, it just washes over you. But the crazy thing is, it only lasts for a few days.
Right, because the situation changes so fast.
It does, because very quickly you realize the real danger isn't starvation. And it isn't the elements. The real danger is the other survivors.
It's the ultimate pressure cooker for human behavior, really.
Yeah.
You are entirely removed from, the laws and social contracts of the outside world.
Completely isolated.
Right. Placed in an environment that actively wants to kill you and forced to make impossible choices.
And today we are taking you straight into the heart of that exact pressure cooker. Welcome to our latest deep dive. We are exploring a really fascinating stack of recent archaeological, historical, and osteological reports, and they are all focused on the Houtman Abrolhos Islands.
Which is an incredible site.
Oh, totally. So those who don't know, these are a chain of coral reefs sitting right off the Midwest coast of Western Australia. And our mission today is to look way beyond the typical, romanticized treasure and shipwrecks narrative.
Because there's so much more to it than just gold in the sand.
Exactly. We are digging into the archaeological findings to extract the real aha moments about human psychology. We're going to see exactly how a remote coral reef became this landscape of desperate survival, a hub of ruthless industry, and basically a 400-year-old forensic crime scene.
And to truly understand the stakes here, you have to understand the geography of the place. When the Dutch navigator Frederik de Houtman formally encountered these islands in 1619, the European world didn't even have a proper name for them yet.
Right, the name itself is a warning.
It is. The word Abrolhos is actually a Portuguese warning cry. It translates roughly to open your eyes.
Because if you didn't open your eyes, you're going to tear the bottom of your hull wide open.
Exactly. It was literally a caution written directly onto navigational charts just to warn sailors about these spiked coral obstructions that are hidden, just millimeters below the water surface.
It's terrifying. And when I was going through the source material, the only way I could picture the Abrolhos Islands in my head was to imagine a mix of, like, the Galapagos Islands and a real-life Lord of the Flies scenario.
That's a very accurate comparison, actually.
Right. You have this extreme geographic isolation, these really unique seabird colonies, and it just becomes the stage for some of the most drastic, unimaginable human events.
And the absolute darkest of those events, without a doubt, is the 1629 wreck of the Batavia.
Yeah, that one is grim.
Very. The Batavia was a flagship of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, and when it struck Morning Reef, the survivors managed to ferry themselves onto a few small islands, primarily one that is now known pretty grimly as Beacon Island.
Batavia's graveyard.
Right. But instead of the shared trauma uniting them, bonding them together, the social order completely fractured. Over the course of a few terrifying months, a mutiny took hold.
And it wasn't just a quiet mutiny.
No, it resulted in the systematic and brutal murder of over 100 men, women, and children.
It's just staggering. For centuries, this was mostly treated as this dark maritime legend, just a scary story. But recently, modern science stepped in to separate the myth from the physical reality.
Yeah, the recent work there has been groundbreaking.
Definitely. Between 2014 and 2019, there was this massive archaeological initiative called the Shipwrecks of the Roaring Forties Project, and they went back to Beacon Island.
And the forensic bioarchaeology that emerged from those excavations, it's profoundly revealing. Researchers located and excavated 12 victims, found in a mix of single graves and multiple communal graves.
Wow. 12 distinct victims.
Yes. And the physical placement of these remains, well, it tells us an enormous amount about the shifting dynamics of power and terror during the mutiny.
The details in these osteological reports, they are the things that will just stick with you long after you hear them. Like, the teams excavated one individual labeled in the reports as SK7.
Right, the young male.
Yeah, a male in his 20s. They found him buried essentially on his right side, but his left arm was folded completely underneath his body. And nearby, in another grave, they found SK9.
Who was just a 5-year-old child.
Yeah, just a kid.
Finding a 5-year-old in that context, it's heady. It strips away the abstract nature of history and really grounds you in the very real, very human cost of the Batavia disaster.
Okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because here's the detail from the reports that completely stopped me in my tracks.
Well, the bone trauma.
Yes. The recent excavations of these specific communal graves showed absolutely no visible signs of violence on the bones. Like, zero. There are no blade marks. There's no gunshot trauma. So I have to push back on the prevailing narrative here.
Go for it.
If we're looking at skeletons from 1629, and there are literally zero marks of violence on the bone, how do the archaeologists definitively know they were murdered? I mean, why couldn't they have just died naturally? You're shipwrecked on a waterless coral reef. Wouldn't dehydration or, I don't know, exposure or disease be the most logical conclusion?
That is the exact tension forensic anthropologists wrestle with every single time they open a grave.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The absence of bone trauma doesn't automatically confirm murder. However, if you look at the matrix of the soil and the context of the burials, the physical environment provides the answer.
You mean like the way they were actually put into the ground?
Precisely. These mass graves were remarkably shallow, the deepest one being only about 1.4 meters down. But more importantly, the bodies were deposited hastily and with profound disrespect.
Ah, okay.
When someone dies of natural causes in a survival community, especially early on in a crisis, there are usually signs of ritual or care at the burial.
Right, like bodies laid out straight.
Exactly. Hands crossed, perhaps buried with personal items. But here, you have bodies just thrown in haphazardly, limbs pinned under torsos, like you mentioned with SK7. Historical accounts, when cross-referenced with this archaeological evidence, strongly suggest these communal graves contain sick individuals who were murdered quietly.
Ah, the stealth phase of the mutiny?
Yes.
Before the mutineers took open, like, tyrannical control of the island, they were taking out the weakest members of the group quietly.
The sick were a massive drain on the extremely limited water and food supplies. And, well, they couldn't fight back. The mutineers didn't want to alert the wider group of survivors to their ultimate plans.
Which was taking over a rescue ship, if one ever arrived, right?
Correct. So they used stealth, strangulation, drowning in the shallows, or smothering.
Wow.
These are horrific methods that leave absolutely no trace on the skeletal record. So the disorganized, rushed nature of the graves tells a forensic story of concealed murder.
The fact that the sand itself is holding on to those behavioral clues, like the sheer haste and panic of a burial, is mind-blowing to me. But extracting those clues from a 400-year-old crime scene on a shifting coral island, I mean, that's a massive technological nightmare. The environment actively fights against preservation.
It really does. And this brings up the immense challenge of actually finding these graves in the first place. Because you might assume that with modern technology, researchers could just bring out ground-penetrating radar, scan the whole island, and map every anomaly instantly.
Right, just X-ray the island and start digging. But the reports show that the GPR was almost entirely useless on Beacon Island. And the physics behind why it failed is fascinating.
It is. Ground-penetrating radar works by sending electromagnetic pulses down into the earth. When those pulses hit a change in material like a buried stone wall or a pocket of disturbed soil, the signal bounces back to the surface. But radar fundamentally relies on the electrical conductivity of the ground.
And Beacon Island is essentially a sponge soaking up the Indian Ocean.
That's the core issue right there. You have a very thin, irregular layer of highly unconsolidated dry sand and coral rubble. Sometimes it's less than 1.3 meters thick. And directly beneath that dry layer is sand, completely saturated with seawater.
And salt water is highly conductive.
Highly. So when the radar pulse hits that wet, salty layer, it just shorts out. The signal essentially bounces back blindingly, creating this massive reflection barrier.
It's like trying to shine a flashlight into a mirror to see what's behind it. The glare just blinds you.
That's a great way to put it.
So because of that drastic variation between the dry coral and the wet sand, the maximum depth the GPR could reliably see was only about half a meter.
Which is a tiny window to look through when you are searching for graves that might be 1.4 meters deep.
Yeah, that's practically useless for the deeper graves.
Exactly. So the researchers had to rely much more heavily on traditional, meticulous excavation techniques. And what they managed to piece together using those traditional methods, well, it's a testament to the precision of modern bioarchaeology.
Which brings us to the teeth.
Oh, yes.
The teeth allocation methodology in these reports is probably the most incredible piece of science I've read all year.
What's fascinating here is how much data a single tooth holds.
Right. So during the excavation of one of the communal graves containing 7 individuals, the team found 18 loose teeth scattered in the soil around the bodies. And the jawbones of the skeletons had 28 possible empty sockets.
Allocating scattered teeth to the correct individual is absolutely crucial. A single tooth can tell a bioarchaeologist about the person's age, their childhood diet, their geographic origins, and, their overall health before the shipwreck.
But making those matches requires an incredibly strict standard of proof. It is literally the world's highest stakes, most morbid jigsaw puzzle. You have 18 loose pieces and 28 possible slots. How did they actually solve it?
They used a multi-layered systematic method. They didn't just jam teeth into skulls. First, they analyzed the tooth morphology.
Like the shape.
Exactly. The physical shape and size of the tooth, the number of roots, the cusp patterns. Then they analyzed the wear patterns. Every single human grinds and wears down their teeth uniquely based on their bite and their diet.
So if you grind your teeth heavily on the right side, the top and bottom teeth are going to wear down together like matching puzzle pieces.
Exactly. So the researchers looked at a loose tooth and examined the microscopic wear on it. That wear had to perfectly match the adjacent teeth still anchored in the skull, and it had to match the opposing teeth in the upper or lower jaw.
Wow.
If those macroscopic signs aligned, they would gently place the loose tooth into the proposed empty socket to visually assess the fit.
But they didn't stop there. This is the part that amazed me. If the tooth looked like a perfect fit to the naked eye, they brought in portable X-ray machines.
Right.
They took radiographs of the loose tooth in situ, placed inside the 400-year-old skull socket, just to confirm that the internal root structure of the tooth perfectly matched the internal cavity of the bone.
The standard of proof was absolute. If a loose tooth happened to physically fit into more than one possible socket, it was completely disqualified from allocation. They couldn't risk corrupting the data.
That is so rigorous.
And using this rigorous method, they successfully allocated 10 of those scattered teeth to their rightful places among the 28 possible sites.
So what does this all mean for us? It means we can identify exactly who suffered on that island with a level of precision that historians decades ago could only dream of.
Truly.
And the forensic discoveries weren't just limited to the graves on Beacon Island. The project also moved over to Long Island, which was a critical location because historical logs suspected it was the site of the gallows.
Yes, the gallows. This is where 7 of the worst mutineers were eventually executed once order was restored by a VOC rescue party.
And the metal detector surveys on Long Island located a concentration of iron fastenings right where the beach offered the easiest, safest landing for a small rowboat.
And it was near that presumed gallows site that the team unearthed an artifact that physically embodies the violence of the mutiny.
The Morning Star.
Yes.
The report describes an artifact made of a sheet of lead that had been roughly folded and pounded into a dense ball. And driven straight through this folded lead were square-section ferrous nails.
Iron spikes protruding from a heavy lead weight. It is a rudimentary, improvised, and incredibly vicious weapon.
It's terrifying to even picture.
Finding a Morning Star on a coral reef speaks volumes. It wasn't standard VOC military issue. It was created on the island, from the wreckage of the ship, with the sole premeditated purpose of crushing a human skull.
Jeez.
It paints a vivid picture of the sheer brutality of the mutineers' reign of terror.
It is pure, concentrated violence. But, the Abrolhos Islands don't just offer us a window into our darkest impulses. If we pull back the lens, we realize that humans don't only default to slaughter when pushed to the brink.
Right, there is another side to the story.
Exactly. The Batavia mutiny is famous because it's horrifying. But to see the other side of human nature, we actually have to physically move our deep dive away from Beacon Island over to the neighboring islands, where entirely different survival strategies played out simultaneously.
This is why the Abrolhos Islands serve as the perfect natural laboratory for studying behavioral models of crisis response. You have different groups of people placed in the exact same hostile environment at the exact same time, and their reactions are just polar opposites.
Let's talk about West Wallaby Island. While the mutineers were systematically murdering the weak on Beacon Island, a separate group of survivors had been sent miles away to West Wallaby to search for water.
And they were led by a VOC soldier named Weeby Hayes.
Right. And when Weeby Hayes and his group realized the horrors unfolding across the water, they didn't succumb to infighting. They organized.
They established a military civic resistance. Realizing the mutineers would eventually come for them, they banded together and built physical stone structures to defend themselves.
And these aren't just like piles of rocks. They built rectangular forts out of flat limestone slabs. They are now officially recognized as the very first European buildings ever constructed in Australia.
Built by starving, desperate men out of pure necessity.
It's incredible.
And studying those structures today requires incredible care. You have 400-year-old, dry-stacked limestone walls exposed to centuries of harsh cyclonic winds. To map these fragile forts without risking their collapse, modern archaeological teams deployed 3D digital photogrammetry.
Which is essentially taking hundreds of high-resolution overlapping 2D photographs from every possible angle and having a computer algorithm stitch them together into a 3D point cloud.
Right. And by doing that, the researchers created millimetrically accurate digital models. They can measure the mortarless joints, study the construction techniques, and track the erosion of the stone over time, all without ever laying a finger on the physical site.
Amazing tech. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Batavia was not the only VOC ship to hit the Abrolhos. If we fast forward almost a century to 1727, another Dutch ship, the Zeewijk, wrecks on Gun Island.
Ah, yes, the Zeewijk.
The Zeewijk survivors find themselves in the exact same horrific situation, stranded on a barren coral reef. But what do? They maintain strict social order. They ration their supplies meticulously.
They work together.
Yeah. And through incredible collaborative engineering, using only scavenged 18th century tools and timber from the wreck, they actually managed to build an entirely new rescue vessel, the Slopey, and sail themselves to safety.
The Zeewijk disaster is the ultimate counterpoint to the Batavia. It proves that the environment doesn't dictate the behavior, the social framework does.
So why did the Zeewijk survivors successfully form a council and build a rescue boat, while the Batavia survivors instantly descended into a bloodbath? What was the variable that tipped the scales?
If you look closely at the historical and archaeological record, it largely comes down to two destabilizing factors on the Batavia: the total collapse of leadership and the presence of immense untraceable wealth.
Ah, the money.
Always. On the Batavia, the highest-ranking officers took the only functional boat and left to seek help, creating an immediate power vacuum. Furthermore, the Batavia was carrying massive amounts of silver specie coined money destined for the spice trade.
And in a world governed by the Dutch East India Company, money is power. But when the ship wrecks, the company's authority basically vanishes. Suddenly, whoever controls the silver controls the future, assuming they get rescued.
Exactly. The presence of that silver specie, combined with the lack of authoritative leadership, provided the perfect psychological catalyst for greed, paranoia, and mutiny.
Wow.
The Zeewijk survivors, conversely, maintained their chain of command. Their captain stayed with the men. The crisis forced them to adapt their daily routines, but their social structure and discipline held firm.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile society can be, and the specific invisible threads that hold it together. But, the Abrolhos didn't stay a landscape of desperate, accidental survival forever.
No, it didn't.
If we jump ahead a few centuries, Europeans returned to these islands, but this time they didn't crash into the reefs by accident. They navigated them on purpose to exploit the landscape.
And this brings us to a massive phase of the island's history that completely transformed the physical environment, the guano era. From roughly 1847 to 1946, the Abrolhos transitioned from an isolated graveyard into a bustling, noisy hub of commercial industry.
Guano, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with 19th century agriculture, is accumulated seabird excrement.
Bird poop.
Bird poop. Because the Abrolhos had been a massive breeding ground for birds for millennia, the islands were covered in thick layers of guano and rock phosphate, which was incredibly valuable globally as fertilizer.
The extraction of these resources fundamentally altered the geography of islands like Pelserbert and Rat Island. The scale of a modification was staggering.
The sensory picture of this era is wild to me. Just imagine the noise and the smell. We're talking about companies laying down iron tramways straight across the fragile coral. They built massive stone jetties.
It was a massive operation.
Yeah, they used wooden punts equipped with circular steel hoppers and bucket-type lifting frames to dredge and load the guano directly into waiting ships. They blasted open massive limestone quarries.
And the human element of this industry is equally significant. It was one of the first major industries in Western Australia to heavily utilize indentured labor. You had hundreds of workers living in highly regimented, difficult conditions, manually churning up the earth.
And as you can imagine, a massive industrial machine churning up tiny coral islands caused absolute havoc for the archaeological record of the earlier shipwrecks.
Complete destruction in some areas.
The miners were essentially putting the history book of the island into a blender.
The soil matrix we discussed earlier, the stratigraphy, which is the natural layering of history in the Earth that allows archaeologists to date items based on how deep they are. It was largely destroyed in these mining areas.
Because they dug everything up.
Right. A perfect example of this confusion occurred during an excavation in 1999.
Ah, the leach drain incident.
Yes. A trench was being dug for a modern leach drain near an old settlement area, and they unearthed artifacts. But because the soil had been so heavily turned over and mixed by the guano miners decades prior, the historical timeline was completely flattened.
Everything was jumbled together.
Exactly. They found a 20th century glass bottle resting right next to much older historical remains.
The bottle had the letters ACM embossed on the base, standing for the Australian Glass Manufacturing Company Limited. So you literally have a modern, mass-produced industrial artifact resting right beside the legacy of 17th century castaways.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it synthesizes the entire timeline of the Abrolhos. These islands act as a perfect, condensed microcosm of European history in the region. Well, you start in the 1600s with desperate, accidental survival and horrific violence. Then you see ingenuity and civic resilience. And finally, by the 1800s and 1900s, you transition into planned, ruthless economic exploitation and heavy industrialization.
It is all just stacked on top of each other on these tiny spits of coral. And for you listening, I think this is why this deep dive matters so much today. It's a reminder that every landscape you walk on is a layered recording of human choices.
It truly is.
When you look at the Houtman Abrolhos Islands today, which is now a protected national park, it isn't just a pretty place with pristine reefs and nesting seabirds. It's an archive of human extremes.
It is a profound testament to what we are capable of. It holds the evidence of our absolute darkest, most selfish impulses, but also our incredible capacity for engineering, survival, and cooperation.
We've journeyed from the gruesome, mutinous mass graves of Beacon Island, where victims were buried in the dead of night to hide a conspiracy. We've seen the ingenious resilience of Wiebe Hayes' mortarless fort on West Wallaby. And we've walked through the heavy industrial scarring of the guano trade, which leaves us with a thought to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive looking backward at the archaeological record. But what if this 400-year-old data is actually the blueprint for our future?
It's an incredibly relevant question. Today, major space agencies actually study historical analogs like the Batavia and the Zeeweek to build psychological profiles for long-duration space exploration.
Think about it. If you put a crew in a tin can and send them on a multi-year isolation mission to Mars, and communication with Earth cuts out, they are in the exact same pressure cooker as those shipwrecked sailors.
Exactly the same.
Will the crew default to the collaborative, highly structured survival of the Zeeweek, or will the pressure fracture their society like the Batavia? The sand of the Abrolhos Islands isn't just telling us where we've been, it's warning us about what we pack in our psychological baggage when we head into the unknown.
Absolutely.
It proves that to see human nature clearly, you have to look past the clean binary assumptions and be willing to stare deep into the muddy waters.